Hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. And in today's video, I'm going to be redesigning one of my character concepts. So that's the general theme that you'll be seeing. I put the sketching process on 2.5 times speed because this pencil doesn't show up super well on camera, and frankly, I had quite a bit of time worth of painting that I even had to speed up to keep it to a like 40-minute time frame. So the sketching process is a bit sped up, but it's not a lot of the overall videos. So with that aside, I want to really quickly, before we get into the actual drawing, say thank you guys so much for all of the support on my last video. I truly didn't expect it to go so well. Obviously, none of my other videos have performed quite as excellently in the past, and so I just want to thank you all for over 1,000 subscribers. I had 1,100 last I checked, which is insane. Like, seriously, I never expected to get 100, let alone 1,000. So I just want to thank you all so much for joining me on my art adventures here on the internet, and welcome you all to the little art corner I have. So, thank you so much. Editing Rain never gets a break, but I forgot to say, if you guys draw along with me, I would love to hear about it in the comments, and generally any other creative work that you guys get up to. I love to hear it. I love to know what you're working on. And if you do create anything and you post it to the socials, feel free to tag me. I'd love to see it and support you guys in kind, since you guys are doing so much to support me. And for those of you who want a bit more information on the Arrtx markers, I will be using those again in this video and talking about them a little bit more extensively than I was in my last video, because I've gotten a little bit more familiar with them. So once again, just thank you so much. I really appreciate all of the support and love on the last video. And with that being said, let's get into talking about the general character concept. And so I've talked about it a couple times. You can kind of see it in the top right corner of the screen. I really like the idea of photosynthetic zombie people. In my previous sketches of this character concept, I've done straight, pale, fleshy skin just for the sake of experiment, and I've done the full photosynthetic green skin as well. I've experimented with both, and now it's time to try out my more desired kind of concept, which is to basically create vitiligo representation by having, since it's a zombie, a formerly human person who is being taken over by plants. I very much like the idea of it being partially human skin and then partially photosynthetic flesh-ish. I don't know what it would be, theoretically speaking. Not leaf per se, but to have the skin capable of photosynthesizing additionally to the plants that are growing on the skin. And so I did do some hatching in the drawings on the left page just to kind of get the idea across and see how I want to approach the patches. This is my colored attempt, and so I'm not entirely sure how to approach vitiligo in my art style, right? I'm really accustomed to having chunky line art to separate and distinguish different tones and stuff. I very much enjoy having goofy circles and nonsensical lines as well in my art style, and so I'm very conflicted so far on how I want to approach vitiligo. Even after the entire sketching process, I haven't found if I want to line the separation between the different skin tones and textures, and so I'm not 100% confident in how I want to approach it still, and I'm very open to suggestion on that matter. But actually getting into the rest of the explanation of the concept, I'm very, very fond of, well, back it up. I've done quite a few disability pieces about the process of kind of accepting your life with a chronic illness. And so with that, I've done a couple of designs where I have explored the concept of having no control over your own body and having it become kind of a garden for new growth and different perceptions of how people perceive a chronically ill body. And so with that, I have this one illustration called Consumption that's probably a year old now, wow, that I'm very fond of, and it kind of explores flowers growing from the body and kind of the way that the earth and nature will take over once you've passed, and you will kind of be repurposed into the earth in some capacity. Now, that mixed with the concept of how some fungi are super parasitic and kind of will control bodies and kind of can override whatever they're infecting and parasitizing's actual brain processing, I kind of like the idea of seeing how we could approach, or I could approach, not we, but I could approach the idea of some sort of parasitic entity taking over the dead and turning them into self-sustaining ecosystems. And that kind of concept is super, super interesting to me because you kind of get that fantasy, elven, fairy tale kind of vibe, whilst also having some macabre kind of dark themes to it. So it's very much touching on that interest, and also being a botanist as well. It's also bringing the plants in, and I think it's just like the perfect combination of everything that really, really interests me as an artist. And so I very much need to work on it more. I feel like I'm having a really hard time figuring out ways to make the plants that are coming out from the front of the body appear as three-dimensional as I want them to appear. I think that the prevalence of floral tattoos makes it kind of hard to make plant drawings on the human body not look like just plant tattoos, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But I also don't know that I want to cast super harsh shadows because I don't really like light shadows in my art. I know this is pretty light right now, but it generally will get a lot darker, I promise. And so I'm just really enjoying exploring the concept. And I think this is kind of the theme I want my July MFA residency to have, is kind of plant people and plant zombie character designs, or maybe sentient plant character designs. And so I'm thinking I might explore this a lot more over the next month, just to see where I can go with it. That, or I want to return to some practicing skeletal anatomy. I feel like I haven't really been keeping up with my kind of anatomy practice and making sure that I'm still checking that the way that I'm sketching and the way that feels right is maintaining enough anatomical correctness that it's not super funky to look at, if that makes sense. I think that as my style continues to evolve, I have these periods of time where sketching just comes so naturally to me, and with that I'm more vulnerable to kind of just not having good anatomy. And part of that's because I really like elongated limbs and kind of yeah, long arms, long fingers, and long legs, and so I feel like sometimes I just over exaggerate it to a point where it becomes disconcerting, to a point where it looks like I don't know what I'm doing instead of a stylistic choice that I'm making, which is something I really want to avoid, right? Sure, I'm very fond of my style, I'm very fond of my kind of unreasonable anatomy at times. However, I want it to look natural to my style, and I don't want it to look like I am ignorant to how I'm supposed to be. Not ignorant, but inexperienced in how I should be approaching anatomy, if that makes sense. I'm not really sure that it does. I don't want to look like I'm accusing my style of me not wanting to practice. Oh my gosh, also, one thing that's super annoying about these pens is that the caps don't stick on the back end for the black version of the Arrtx pens. It drives me absolutely bonkers, but that's a complaint for a bit later. But I want to double check my anatomy and see that my sketches are kind of at least reasonable enough that it's not super odd. So I'm also considering skeleton anatomy practice for my next month worth of kind of general practice themes. And I'm very open to suggestions if there's anything you guys particularly want to see. Of course, I'm always very excited to hear what you guys are thinking about and wanting to create additionally, so of course let me know if you have any particular thought. Now that the color palette is a little bit more established, I feel like I can kind of start articulating my thoughts about why I'm making the decisions I'm making and not sound crazy because there's a visual. So I wanted to go with a general, very, the lightest skin tone the Arrtx markers had, because my first go at this, I want to approach a bit more of a pallid, kind of lifeless kind of appearance to it, so I wanted generally the lightest skin that I could get, and then I wanted to also be able to have kind of those purple undertones that look particularly cold and not very lifeless, or very lively, not very lively either. And so that's just for the general kind of zombie vibe to help me articulate it as somebody who doesn't have experience with the concept yet, right? Once I'm more established in how I want to present these ideas and how they look, and if it's a very viable concept, then I could start thinking about more deeper skin tones and have my message actually getting across. But for now, I wanted to keep the dead feeling to it in hopes that it would help me to push the dead part across how I want it to come across. So that's also a part of the reason for the purple shadows, the kind of pallor kind of feeling to it. However, I also just always shade with purple as my personal preference. It's my number one go-to, and it just so happens that there's enough light purple fleshy tones to them that I'm able to kind of have a more dead purple to my shadowing than I usually would be able to. And I went for the mid-tone green in terms of the vitiligo, so that I had a lot to build off of, and it felt as close to a plant green as the set allowed me to have, because I was originally very attracted to the mint green color. I was thinking that it would go really well with the kind of lifeless skin color that I'm trying to go for, and with that, it would kind of keep up the feeling. But generally, when a plant isn't doing photosynthesis correctly, and it does have chlorophyll, so it has the green photosynthesizing color, not a red plant or a plant with like red leaves or anything like that, generally it turns yellow when chlorophyll dies, so it wouldn't make sense to go for a mint green. And I didn't want to step too far out of what I know for a first go at the mixed skin color combination. It's something I can always work on later, or I can go in digitally and kind of experiment with the shades of green a bit more effectively. But for now, I wanted to go with a more grass green kind of feel to it. And because I was trying to think of a way to censor the character without putting clothes on, just so that I could explore how I wanted to approach the body, I did put moss over one chest and grass over the other. Unfortunately, the issue that I ran into is that it's hard to tell the vitiligo apart from the moss, and so that's something I need to think about a lot more effectively in the future, so that my thoughts and my overall theme is being conveyed in a way that is most effective and kind of understandable, right? And so I'm not really sure how I'm going to resolve that issue, if I'm going to get rid of the moss, if I'm going to change the moss color, if I'm going to put mushrooms over it or flowers. I don't really want it to feel convenient where all of the plants are placed necessarily right out the gate. That's why I put so much stuff on her left hip or right side, because I wanted it to be clear that wearing clothing isn't particularly convenient when you're hosting a bunch of plants out of your body and you don't have complete autonomy over how these plants are kind of existing within your life and your body, right? That's kind of where I wanted to go with it. And so I don't want the plants to feel completely convenient, and putting them right over the chest for like a flower, a singular flower, wouldn't make sense. And I don't know if I want to do tiny wildflowers, so I'm thinking about it. It's something that I'm very open to exploring a lot more. And of course, considering this is something that I'm thinking of as like a whole concept, right? Like this is a group of people that have been taken over and are now plant people or ecosystems. It's something that I can explore throughout a variety of different characters, because there's going to be multiple, right? Think of this as like a village of zombie people or something like that, or just little forest guardians who preserve plants and just do that all day. I don't know what they do. I haven't thought this through. And then I went for brown hair because it was one of the colors I wasn't really planning to use on any of the mushrooms, and so it felt like it would create a nice kind of darker contrast, something to draw the eye up towards those flowers, kind of offset the mid-tones that were happening right down the rest of the body. Blue eyes felt kind of fine. I didn't have a lot of plans for blue, but I knew I wanted to do some blue flowers, and so I wanted to have that consistency to it. So, it wasn't 100% thought through to that capacity, but enough that it felt kind of reasonable to do the blue eyes. The green eyes I feel like would have been a little bit too much green, a little bit too excessive, and brown eyes would have competed with the hair too much, and I didn't want to go a completely unnatural eye color, right? So that's where I ended up with the blue, and then going in with a lot more purple, trying to get that kind of paler, dead feeling to it was honestly the easiest part. Shading with purple is something that I know very well, and I generally have more lifeless looking characters, and generally have a lot more lifeless looking art in general for a lot of the people I draw. I generally like people to look a bit more sickly and unalive, and that's partially because a lot of my art is based in chronic illness, and so I'm very accustomed to creating things that are representational of being chronically ill and feeling sick, right? And so generally the shading was kind of easy. However, there's not enough skin tones in the two Arrtx sets I have, the 24 and the 30, I believe, set. And because of that, it's impossible to get good variation on the skin tone that feels like a comfortable transitions occurring. Like the next closest skin tone, for even the pale and the brown end, because those are really all you can do for darker skin tones are brown, unless you're doing a character that doesn't have a natural skin tone at all. There's, I think, one proper shade of brown in the 30 set, and then a nice deep brown that's very lovely in the 24 set, which is the black ones that I have. And then the pale color that I have is the base. That general kind of softer purple is the pinkish purple, is the next closest skin tone. And so it's hard to get those nice kind of bits to the body where it feels like natural shadows are being cast, but not having it be a full purple, like a full harsh purple, and it makes it hard to create kind of blemishes and little skin blotches here and there like I would like to. I don't want to go overhand with the coloring of the skin because I don't want it to be the main focus. I want the plants to be the main focus. I want the overall theme to be very digestible, but I want to have more changes to the tones of the flesh that it creates an intrigue and feels a bit more natural. And I just feel like the paint pens themselves don't allow that. If you're choosing to approach a more kind of natural skin kind of approach to it, I think it would work really well though if I do ultimately combat my dissatisfaction with the amount of skin tones by going over it with these really cheap mechanical colored pencils I have. The only time I use them is to go over paint or markers because they're just really low quality and you can't get a particularly smooth layer with them without going over like 5 times. So having them over a base, it just creates a really nice texture, and I found that that was able to kind of resolve my overall dissatisfaction with the ability to create a variety to the skin without it looking like intense shading or some sort of shadow being cast, and I think it works pretty well. I do that a lot with marker just because I'm not particularly good at blending them, and I can't get the tips particularly fine just because I'm shaky-handed. And so it worked pretty similarly on the paint. I wouldn't say that the colored pencils take to the Arrtx markers quite as well, but I've kind of noticed that pencils don't take to the just to paint in general particularly excellently. And so with that, I'm not surprised about the overall kind of quality of the layering. But it does help create some sense of texture to the skin, which is something that's very important to me with my art style. And so I think that it generally resolved my overall issues, but I hope that in a bigger set there are more deep and pale skin tones alike so that you can have that type of variety. I'm not really getting it in the 24 set for the black ones and the 30 set for the white Arrtx pens. And so, not horrible, and it really depends on what you're using these for, but that's just my kind of general complaint. But it's still really resolvable, right? And I think, as I mentioned a moment ago, layering it over markers I think would do wonderfully for creating this nice smooth overlay and having the ability to still have that kind of variety in skin that I'm personally looking for. A lot of the time with my art, I don't really like a perfectly smooth body or anything really. I like texture, and I feel like I'm missing something when I don't have that sensation or that illusion that this is something you can like touch and feel. I like the idea that you can feel my art. Like you look at it and you're like, oh, I can imagine what it would feel like if I touched that. And that's something that I particularly like, and that's why I value colored pencils and things that can create the illusion of more to it. So, generally, that's just my personal kind of complaint so far, and it's very much not applicable to everyone. And I have plenty of other paint pens that can help me with this. I just didn't want to test them out on this drawing in general just because I didn't want to completely ruin it because I really liked how it was going. So I think I have enough paint pens of other brands that I can make up for the skin texture issue. And if I was doing my more hyper pop style, where I'm doing a lot of kooky colors on the skin and I'm not striving for realism in, not realism, but realistic skin tones, if I wasn't kind of doing that to try and quell how personally anxious I am that the drawing will get too busy if I start including that component of my art style, the more wild colors and stuff to the skin and nonsensical lighting. If I wasn't anxious about how that would impact the busyness of this, because there's already so much going on and I want the plants to be super obvious, I think that would also resolve the issue. For the most part. And so it's up in the air, right? I definitely can work with these perfectly fine. I think they're incredibly great quality. I'm still firm in the thought that I think these are my new favorite paint pens. And that's rare for me to say. I don't usually believe in favorites. And I generally am like, I like this one for this reason and this one for another reason. These very much suit the way I like to create. The brush tip is absolutely excellent for me and how I like to create. And my other my other paint pens, they have really big nibs. And I generally find it's hard to get fine details. And so having the bullet tip on one end for the black ones and the brush tip on the others makes it very versatile and beneficial for me personally in how I like to create. And I really think these are excellent. And they very much suit how I like to create. Do I think they'd be great for people who like to have a more realism approach to their art? Maybe not. I don't think it would be super easy to get the nuances of skin colors and stuff with these sets. I don't know if they break their sets down into smaller sets based on themes like earth tones or if they have a skin tone set. But I think it's kind of 50-50 on how well the colors of the set will work depending on the type of art you create. This is something to consider when making decisions like this. That's something that I considered when making the decision to get these, of course, and generally I always have a use for bright, vibrant, and pastel colors and those deeper tones that come in the black set because my style is more Baroque period style generally when I'm doing digital art and more hyperpop when I'm doing traditional art. And I do merge those from time to time, and I do bring the more dark and muddled kind of macabre themes into my traditional in terms of coloring. And because I have a very vibrant traditional style frequently, I think it overall really works. And so I have a lot of viability for working with these sets, and my art style is only so consistent depending on the theme of my work if I'm doing disability representation or character design. So they work for me very well. Do I think that they're a great color scheme for everybody? Not necessarily. I think these are very good for people who like pastels, and I think these are very good for people who want a set of basics for paint pens, because I do think that the black pen set, which is the 24 set that I have, has kind of a little bit of everything you need for those classics. I'd say it's kind of like your beginner set of like crayons or colored pencils. It has deep, medium, and light for most colors. I think that is lacking on red, and I don't think there's a pink off the top of my head, but I can't see in the frame of the video, and I'm not at my desk currently. But, you know, I think they're incredibly good, and I'm very, very fond of them. And I do plan to use the life out of them, plus some. So, with that being said, I think they're a very, very good investment if you're interested in this type of stuff. I do like them more than Poscas and my T5s, but I think the T5s have a variety in color that is incredibly desirable to me, especially in the green department. So, with that, I've gotten to the point in the artistic process where I need line art. I've done as much as I can with color without having those defined lines that I'm super reliant on and particularly fond of, and so I wanted to go light at first and just kind of go over in a purple pen and kind of feel out, do I like the purple? Do I feel good with the purple? Am I kind of wanting to go darker for these things? Do I want to go colored with the plants and then darker with the other parts of the body, like the arms and things of that nature? And I think that I generally liked breaking them up based on general theme. I do think that the purple looks really nice with the more plant bodies. It helps them stand out, but it isn't going to create too much competition when I go over the rest of the body in black. And that's something that's kind of just something I felt out. I don't really have a logic behind that. It just depends on the drawing and the day. If I want to go over everything in black or have a variety amongst my colors, I just really think that the purple is looking really nice, which isn't something I usually kind of feel about colored pens. I don't generally like them for actual proper line art, and so that was a very pleasant surprise to see how much I enjoyed it. I'm usually like, oh, it's fine, but black is better, right? I'm very rarely enchanted by a kind of colored pen, and so I was very, very happy and satisfied with the ability to have variety and feel good about it. But I did find that it was hard to record a lot of the inking process because of how I defined my lines with the brush pen. I found I was just leaning into the frame of the camera way too much, so if you see awkward jump cuts at any point, that's because my head was in the way. But I think that it turned out really nice having the mixed line art, and I'm very, very satisfied with the decision I made ultimately. However, I do think that I could have gone heavier with my line art in the hair overall. You'll see what I'm talking about in a bit. I just feel like I wasn't quite as heavy-handed as I usually would be, and so I didn't have the definition at the end that I would have liked. And it'll make more sense when we get there, but I'm prefacing it so that you guys know what I'm talking about in advance before we actually get to the point where it's kind of just not encompassing basically the rest of my concluding thoughts and everything. I kind of spaced it, but I didn't think to put up a picture of my first attempt at this, so I will be putting up a photo from my video where I did this concept before, right about here, And so that you guys have a frame of reference for my first time kind of trying to do a proper illustration. You can see how I have improved and changed and differences that have been made. And so I can also kind of show a bit of a non-vitiligo attempt at this concept and how I'm kind of progressing with fleshing out the general character concept. So I think that'll be helpful. And additionally, I do think that overall I didn't do the vitiligo justice quite the way I had wanted to. I think that it ended up looking a lot more just like moss, and that's something I really need to think about how I want to approach in the future and figure out how I want to properly kind of present that information through the illustration. And I think part of it might be that I was trying to get the general textures that I really like to have in skin, and I got carried away because there's so much more green options than skin tone options, and I think that that might be where I was starting to have too much issue, where it ended up looking like moss on the body instead of part of the skin, which isn't bad. It still fits the theme, of course, but it wasn't conveying what I wanted to. And so if any of you have particular suggestions on how that can be conveyed more effectively to an audience, I would be really interested in knowing, just because I think this is an area where I'm very out of my depth and I'm not entirely sure how to approach it. So I'm hoping that it'll help. I'm thinking that what I need to do is I need to just sit down and do a lot of studies of people with vitiligo and see how I would present the appearance of it in my art style without such a abnormal color like green being part of it. And that's probably what my next couple threads will be, is me just doing little studies. Maybe I'll do it on separate paper and tape it in, as I generally tend to do, but I'm thinking that that might help me to figure out how I want to do it. But if any of you have suggestions, I love to hear it. What's the point of art if we don't share information and thoughts and opinions and things like that? Well, I mean, generally, like, don't harass people, but you know what I mean. So I think that that's what I need to do to kind of figure out how to make it convey a bit more effectively. Maybe the solution would be choosing a photosynthetic pigment that isn't green like chlorophyll, so maybe an anthocyanin, so purple for the photosynthetic pigment, or just red or something like that, something other than green. But I don't know, I don't want to look too much like internal organs or like poorly rendered open flesh for colors like red. Purple will combat with the shading a lot, so I'm gonna have to think about it. Maybe I can do like a yellow. I don't like the color yellow particularly that much though, so I don't know. I'll have to explore it a lot more. My next step in the practice is to do some darker skin tones, which I don't think I can do with the Arrtx markers, so I'm gonna do a just marker, like an Ohuhu marker illustration, and then put the paint pens over it, just because I don't think I'm gonna get enough variety in the skin tone, and it'll just end up looking like tree bark with the two browns that I have. And the Ohuhus have such a wonderful variety of skin tones in their skin tone set that I have, but also just enough browns and kind of mid-tones for the skin that these pens don't have in their general sets. So I think that's my next step, is to explore some darker skin tones, maybe just do like 6 faces and explore them, do the vitiligo with those, see how I feel about it, approach kind of exploring different character tones, maybe try fully unnatural colors for the skin, so like it's a fully photosynthetic being. And then I think I'm going to think a little bit more about how I want to approach the concept of death within it. I mean, the character is intended to be dead, and so I think my next step is to approach either a kind of lore-related aspect to why these plants are taking over and how this occurs. So is it completely natural and like playing on human fear? So, like, this was inspired by the fungus that can control ants. Like, it can possess their body and take over their mind and control them, right? And so that's what this was inspired by. By the way, don't look it up if you don't like ants. And also, I hate it, just in general. My least favorite fungus, maybe, is that. I don't think it's actually called Animus corpus. It's corpus something. But, I hate it. But maybe it'll play on human fears, like a fungi actually can just bring humans back from the dead, which would be terrifying, and I would cease to exist. I would just evaporate from the mortal plane of reality and enter the fourth dimension or something. I don't even know what I would do. I would just die. I would be scared, stupid, just cease existing. Or is this some sort of magic, and these are basically people who die in the forest or are buried in the forest, become forest spirits or something of that nature, right? So I gotta explore it. I'll see how I feel, play around with it. Do I want it to be terrifying and make me want to cry, or do I want it to be fantastical? I don't know yet, but let me know down below if you have any thoughts on that. But with that being said, I also want to know if you guys have any recommendations for a background color. I'm thinking blue or gray, but for now, I think she's not standing out from the background too much because the skin tone's so similar to the paper. But with that being said, I'm running out of time, so thank you so much for sitting all the way through this video. Like if you like, dislike if you dislike, subscribe if you want to see more of my content, and share if you're interested in sharing with anybody. With that being said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are, and bye-bye!